This podcast supports fumigators in improving safety, compliance, and solutions. Always follow the federal fumigant label, state and local laws. Licensed fumigators are legally responsible for their applications. And now, on to All Things Fumigation. Out here, we don't just fight pests. We outsmart them. This is All Things Fumigation, where applied science meets real-world grit. I'm John B. Mueller, a fumigator by trade, and your guide to the science of fumigation done right. Each month, we saddle up with the people, the practices, and the precision it takes to keep facilities safe, compliant, and pest-free. Because when you're in the trenches of pest control, you don't need magic, you need science, and maybe a little cowboy spirit. Smarter solutions, safer practices, managed costs. Welcome to All Things Fumigation. All right, welcome back to All Things Fumigation. And this is episode 5B, or maybe episode 6. In our last recording, we had a really kind of a special segment on Ethyl Formate. I went through some of the basic foundational aspects of Ethyl Formate, and then we interviewed a post-harvest researcher, Dr. Spencer Walsh with UC Davis. And we also interviewed another individual, and the podcast went very long. So we decided to break this up into really two podcasts because there was just so much information, really even just from a foundational standpoint. We're going to get into our next person that we're interviewing, and I think you'll find this to be enjoyable. I want to take a moment. If you find this episode helpful, please like us on your streaming choice. Greatly appreciate that. That helps us out a lot. And we'd also like for you to give us your feedback. We want to take those suggestions. We want your suggestions for what's important for future episodes and future programming. So don't be afraid to email me, call me, make suggestions, but we really want that. We're going to start sharing that on the next episode, and we'll give you a shout out as well. Our next person that we're going to be interviewing is another good friend of mine, is Kade McConville with the Intreso Group. Kade is the executive director and is also a director of Drozlovka Agricultural Solutions. So these are the two companies that have worked very hard and spent a tremendous amount of money bringing this new fumigant tool, eFUME, to us, Ethyl Formate. And we want to get a manufacturer's perspective now that we've had Spencer as a researcher's perspective. So I want to welcome you to the podcast, and I will say I think Kade is a better skier than Spencer is, so I'll throw that out there. And he's probably a better dart thrower as well. So welcome. Welcome.
Great
Kade.
intro, John. Great intro.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
yeah.
Thanks
No
for the
problem.
opportunity for this. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. No, I've known you for quite a while. I think we go back to St. Elmo's Steakhouse in Indianapolis when Wes Perdue, another good friend of ours, introduced us at that time. And then we came back together a few years later, and you're still in this strange post-harvest fumigation realm.
Still in the circus. Still in the circus, John.
We haven't scared you off yet.
It's the gift that keeps on giving most of the time.
Yeah. So welcome to All Things Fumigation. We really appreciate it, and I know it's very early in Melbourne for you right now, but want to get your perspective on your product, and see if you can give us. We've got a little research history from Dr. Walsh, but we want to get product history from the manufacturer's perspective, so we can kind of understand the origins of eFUME and Ethyl Formate.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, look, just to some background as you introduced, John, I've been involved with Drozlovka, a multinational chemical manufacturer based out of Czech Republic, for 10 years, but I've been involved across the sector for close to 15 years now. Mainly on the product development side, so not so much on the actual chemistry side, but on the commercialization side of the business. So, we have always been a company which is focused on basically the full supply chain and the vertical integration of products, all the way through to the end user. And Draslovka and Intreso Group, Intreso being International Treatment Solutions, have really been managing 3 core products over the last few years. But really, we've really seen a ramp up with eFUME and Ethyl Formate based products. Let's say over the last 9 to 10 years, as we've been predominantly working on the US registration itself. So we're in a unique position right now, as you've covered with Spencer and in the last segment. We're really we're at a tipping point now, and I think that this is a really exciting opportunity for the global markets for fumigation, but particularly with something with like Ethyl Formate, like Spencer explained, it's a game changer that we see.
Yeah, I agree, and it's been long needed, right? One of the things I wanted to kind of point out, I think, is how long was it that you registered? You were in the registration process with Ethyl Formate in the U.S.?
Yeah, so we were in the registration process for approximately 7 years. So we've invested a lot of time and effort into it, and I've got a lot less hair and it's a lot grayer because of it. But I think that we've really got to a point now where that we've now got a dossier. For those who don't know, a registration involves a huge amount of data, particularly for products which are 21st century fumigants. You've got a lot of, let's say, products that are on the market which have a number of data gaps, but they were things that were registered a long time ago. You can imagine now, with the world that we live in now, the amount of data, documentation, studies, everything that we need to present to get a registration across the board is astronomical. And that's included a huge amount of investment from our side, particularly on the health and human element of the product, but also on the efficacy, as you touched on with Spencer before. So, whilst it's been a very lengthy process and involved a lot of resources from our side, I think that the actual cost itself, both in from a cash perspective, but also from a human resources perspective, has been very high.
Yeah, and thank goodness there weren't concerning residues. That part is usually the hard part with new chemistry introduction. So that one was an easy one.
From our perspective, it was also very interesting because we had to take a certain calculated risk throughout the whole registration process that may not have been the case. The fact that we got a substance approved by the US EPA, by the USDA, with no RLs in the 21st century is phenomenal.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't know if everybody quite understands, but exempt from residues is a huge issue, and it's really going to play into more discussion around organic options for this product that we'll get into a little later. But that's something I'm particularly excited about. But you talked about a lot of the work went into the safe handling of your product, and that's bystander safety, operator safety, applicator safety. We really want to make sure, and I've been impressed by a lot of the items that I've read on your label. Can you kind of go over with the listeners on how safety is managed when handling eFUME?
Yeah, so in the end, you've got a couple of main hazards with eFUME as a product. So firstly, we have to differentiate between Ethyl Formate and eFUME, as Ethyl Formate being the active substance, eFUME being the actual product itself as a mixture or a formulation with carbon dioxide. So if we look at eFUME as a formulated product, we're dealing with high pressure gas, and we're dealing with cold substance. We've got 2 substances that are in the same cylinder, which are very chemically different to each other. They also vaporize at different rates. So we've needed to design the equipment around it, and as Spencer mentioned before, also flammability. Flammability is a big concern with this product, and I think that the flammability we have mitigated by the formulation with CO2, and we had to do a huge amount of work in behind the studies, etc., to be able to use it safely and effectively in the field. But that also transposed across to the equipment itself. So the equipment that you use for the application of eFUME is not just plug an eFUME cylinder into a methyl bromide vaporizer and away you go. This is specialized equipment that we've patented. We've done the work in behind it to ensure that we're able to deliver the product safely into enclosures, whether that be, again, from our side, it's more than just the infield applications, but it's silos, it's warehouses, it's containers, anything that you can fumigate now, you can fumigate pretty much with Ethyl Formate based products.
Just to be clear, you can't put ethyl formate through a turkey fryer like you do with methyl bromide, right? It's a very specific vapor. It's a very specific vaporizer. I want to emphasize that.
Yeah, it's a very specific. If you go and put this through, there won't be much left, to be honest. Yes. So I think that we need to be very mindful that we focus on the fact that the equipment itself is specialized. We're working with a number of US manufacturers. We're also working we've got our own patented equipment from Australia, but we also work with different players globally if they're interested in building their own equipment or bringing their own equipment to market to facilitate the use of eFUME. I say go ahead. We're more than happy to. My background is engineering. I love tinkering and I love playing with new stuff. For me, it's really interesting and engaging when we see suppliers want to engage with us as well.
Perfect. From a regulation, so we talked about safety. Another big issue that's growing in the U.S. and really globally is how is this product regulated? Are there notables? Is there anything specific in terms of the regulation in the use of ethyl formate or eFUME?
Look, I think that it really comes down. It's a country by country basis. What we see is that let's say if we look in Australia, if we look in the US, and other countries, we have a certain regulation behind, obviously, product labels, etc., of what's involved with that, and the regulations which the authorities put onto the product itself. When we look at the regulatory side of ethyl formate, albeit that it is a naturally occurring substance, we've got all of the data to support it in the background. It's generally regarded as safe. That is actually a status that is on ethyl formate, which is that it is a generally regarded as safe or GRAS status, meaning that it's got a very high TLV. Ethyl formate has a TLV of 100 ppm. So in that way, we see that from a regulatory perspective, there are a number of hurdles in every country. It still must go through basically a pesticide registration per se. So each country differs in that respect, but we've now been able to generate enough data and I believe an over the top amount of data regarding the safety and the application of the product and the efficacy of the product to support that in nearly every country that we would like to enter.
Perfect. The current label as approved is really focused on table grapes, citrus, kiwis. You're modifying that label to include BMSB, correct?
Yeah, correct. So I think what we need to be clear of is that, particularly in the US, and I know that this is a very US-centric discussion, but I think when we look at the US, we predominantly, or we only focused on some key commodities. Now, by key, I'm sure some of your listeners will say, well, these aren't key, specifically key commodities within the market. But I think that our advantage was that we had extremely strong partners who were really engaged in this process. I take the table grapes, for example. We've been very heavily involved with Western fumigation in particular on the East Coast. They've been so engaged throughout this process to get those table grapes onto this label and to support us. That's why it is one of the key commodities on the label right now. In saying that, the 4 commodities that are on the label right now: citrus, table grapes, kiwi fruit. 3 commodities that are on the label, but then we're going for BMSB. We've never wanted to do a shotgun approach. Because if we look at the label that we have in Australia as an example, we have 45 commodities on our label. Now that's including all kinds of things that we can treat. We're treating grain, we're treating blueberries, we're treating apricots, we're treating nuts. All kinds of things are on that label. And now's our opportunity that, because we've got a rather limited label to only 4 commodities in the US, Now is our opportunity to then do that label extension to key markets as the industry demands. So we're very much engaged with industry to understand exactly where they would like us to target next, and it really just has to enter the queue. And the more support we get from industry, the better. So when you said, John, about BMSB for us is a really interesting one, and the reason is that BMSB is not regulated by the USDA. So the regulator for BMSB is the Department of Agriculture in Australia and Ministry of Primary Industries in New Zealand. They are the ones who stipulate that eFUME can be used for BMSB treatments. So therefore, we are not reliant on a USDA approval in order to be able to use it for BMSB. We are reliant on the Australian and the New Zealand governments accepting it as a treatment. So that's why we're going through a change of label at the moment to try to get BMSB included. US is the biggest exporter of BMSB treated consignments to Australia globally on an annual basis, and predominantly that is treated with sulfuryl fluoride or methyl bromide. So now we see that the Australian government is shifting to a more environmentally sustainable viewpoint, and that's why they've been very supportive of eFUME being registered and being able to be used for BMSB as well. And that's the reason why we've specifically gone after that market.
Perfect. It makes sense. Like Spencer said, these are surface pests. You're not having to penetrate much there on some of the hard durables that are being treated. Let's shift a little bit. Every fumigator wants to understand costs and how Ethyl Formate lines up against other fumigants. As in a general rule, without too deep of a dive, I mean, what's your perspective? Because I know you've looked at this and lived this very tightly.
Yeah, I think we have to look at, and I think that sometimes from a fumigation standpoint, a lot of fumigators, a lot of operators and business owners do look at the cost of fumigant, and immediately while I'm saying this, you're going to think that I'm going to say it's really expensive. But I think that from my point of view, the industry needs to understand that there are other things that relate to cost, which will offset cost anyway. I can categorically say that eFUME is in line with the cost of other fumigants. There's no other fumigants that are on the market right now. One of the key challenges with Ethyl Formate is that because it is a relatively, I don't like to use the word benign, but it's a relatively soft fumigant in the scheme of things. It's also a lot less toxic than everything else that's on the market. That means that clearly you need a higher dose rate as well. So in general, you need, whilst the product is the same, is a comparative cost, you do have a higher dose rate that is required for specific insects and pests to get the same control. So that's one element of cost. So I can say, yep, categorically about the same cost as other fumigants that are on the market, pound for pound. But if we look at the dose rate, your dose rate is generally higher. So, but again, that's very variable depending on all the commodities that are on the market, commodities that will be on the label and commodities that we target right now. We target anything from, I believe that our lowest dose rate on our label in Australia is about 60 grams per cubic meter. But then we go up to, let's say, 420 grams per cubic meter for some commodities as well. So you've got some really big variation there with what you're treating versus the cost. The other thing that plays into this is all about the handling of the product, the commodities after treatment. So if you look at BMSB right now, you need to treat BMSB for 12 hours with sulfuryl fluoride, and with eFUME, it's 4 hours for exactly the same thing. So you're now looking at a much shorter turnaround time with eFUME than what you were with sulfuryl fluoride. That'll increase your throughput. That'll increase the whole logistics and supply chain element. So therefore, there are other advantages within that supply chain which will offset some cost as well. So I think that that whole timing piece is very critical to saving some time. But again, eFUME price wise is the same as anything else on the market. In some cases, if not cheaper.
Yeah, and I've always looked at it this way as well. Time, it's time or expense, right? And to our customers, a quicker turnaround time is very important. But when you're a third-party fumigator, it's about crew utilization. If you can get more done in less time and drive revenue at a faster pace, you can incur a little higher input cost if that's what it takes to do that. So you have to be realistic about your view of what the true, as I think as you mentioned, what the true cost is. So I think that's very important.
Yes, and I think that we need to look at it as a whole within the supply chain rather than just as the product by itself. So we know that based on, if we look at the Australian market and we understand what we're doing in grain, for example, we know that we are at the moment 15% higher than the use of methyl bromide, for example, in Australia. So as a whole package. So, and we've done some case studies, etc., on that to understand really where we needed to price the product in order for it to be both effective, but also to be able to obviously offset a huge amount of investment and expenses that we've had in the past as well. So.
Perfect. I want to shift a little bit into what I'm excited about, which is just. To me, this has all the potential for being the first real legitimate answer for organic commodity managers and organic food processing companies. They've really been bogged down by the inability to manage infestation, especially from a organic commodities perspective. And I'm talking about more of like dry goods, like grains and nuts and whatnot, seeds and pulses. So. Can you give us just an insight into your perspective on where this is going from a potential legitimate organic treatment tool?
Yeah, this is quite an exciting or interesting space right now. I think that from an organic perspective, again, as I mentioned before regarding regulatory, each country or each region defines organic as different, and that's one of the both advantages and disadvantages. When we look at some countries, they will accept things as organic. With that, other countries, let's say USA, Australia, etc., would never accept it as organic in the market. So we're very careful that we're not promoting our product as organic upfront, albeit that in some countries we're immediately going for that status, as an example. So, however, I think that it's a really interesting space where CO2 by itself as a carrier gas. I need to be clear about eFUME is specifically ethyl formate mixed with carbon dioxide, and there is a reason behind that. If we look at ethyl formate with nitrogen, for example, the data doesn't exist. It's not the same efficacy as a CO2 mixture. The CO2 has a synergistic effect to that. So when we look at the CO2 element of eFUME, that's an easy one. We can get an organic status for the CO2 component. The ethyl formate component is a little bit trickier. In order for an organic substance to be registered, it must come from a natural source. So we are currently working with a couple of very exciting companies in the US, from a standpoint of natural production, and we're already approaching USDA regarding what that could look like from an organic status. So I think that we've got the registration, we've ticked that box. Now we need to move to that next phase of looking at organic registration. That in itself can take a long time to get that done. So in the meantime, we're obviously focusing on a number of other countries. As I said before, we've got registration in a number of countries already, and we're trying to understand also what their organic status is, so that we can try to harmonize that as much as possible and be able to get those supply sources of ethyl formate to be able to use for our product as well. There are lots of sources of ethyl formate, but again, it comes down to the purity of the substance. Ethyl formate breaks down very, very quickly, as Spencer said before. It's self-scrubbing. So I think that we are in a position where we are working with manufacturers, we're working with some startups in regards to getting ethyl formate from let's not call it a natural source, but let's call it a not synthetic source, if we could say it that way.
That's a teaser. That is exciting. I've got one last question for you. Fumigant registrants, they have many needs, right? And a lot of times fumigators in the field, especially in these early commercialization pathways, there's data to still be gathered. There's some support needs as you start to roll this out. Other than being extremely careful and not having hiccups with this new tool, are there one or two specific asks as a registrant of the industry here in support of this new tool?
Yeah, I think that we're in a bit of a unique position. I think that we're in a unique position because we have a fumigant. We've now achieved a registration, which again, as we know, these don't come around very often. And I think that, again, through things like this podcast, through industry events, through conferences, what we're trying to do is just engage with industry in general. We're trying to engage with industry to get their support. Market cooperation on this is absolutely essential. It's not just for the cooperation, but it's for endorsement. I think that, in the end, we are a manufacturer, so we always have a vested interest in how something is going to be marketed, and obviously the regulators can see that as well. So they obviously can see that here's a manufacturer, all they want to do is sell their product. I think that that's where we need the industry support and the market cooperation to really be there and endorsing the products. And that's not to say that you're necessarily endorsing ethyl formate as a substance, and we just happen to have a product that's on the market that can do that. In the end, we are doing things like, for example, in the southeast of the US, we're doing some special local needs permits to be able to use the product for BMSB, but that involves letters to the local regulatory authorities. That involves coordination with government officials, etc., to enable that to be used. And that's where we have some very strong partners who help us with that kind of endorsement to industry, to the regulators themselves. So we need them to be aware of the product. We need people to reach out to us. I can't reach out to everyone. It's my role to do this commercialization in behind the product, to launch it particularly into the US, but again into the global markets that we're servicing. But again, it's opportunities like this that we hope to at least spread the word that there is a new fumigant available. And then if anyone reaches out through this podcast or whatever, anything is a massive advantage to us. When we then go to market, we can understand sizes of markets, market opportunities, where to put our attention to. And I think that's where we're relying on the feedback from industry. We do a lot of industry research ourselves, but I think that it's got to be a collaborative effort to get this product to market as well.
Yeah, agreed. And Spencer brought it up. You've touched base with it as well. Just like any of our tools, this has to be used safely. It has to be used effectively. None of these fumigants are magic beans. They are applied science, and we have to follow that science. So I really appreciate you agreeing to be on the podcast. This was a really nice thing for us. I very, very much appreciate it. Hope to get you on here again sometime. As this is all the foundational information for eFUME and ethyl formate, and I think a future episode is going to be centered around digging a little deeper and getting out into the field with it. So I look forward to that, and hopefully we can bring you on for that as well.
No, thank you very much, John. I think, again, thanks for the opportunity. I think this is a really interesting step and a really big step forward in regards to access to a new substance in the US, which is approved to use right now. From a regulatory standpoint, there is so much more work to do, particularly around market access, etc., that needs to take place. But this US EPA registration has really set forth our next, let's say, 3 to 5 year plans of where we want to see this product and how we want to see it hit the market. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and congratulations. This was no small feat. So thank you again, Kade. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
All right, this was one of our longer podcasts, but I think there was quite a bit of information that hopefully you were able to glean from this. And starting with a PhD chemist, going to a chemical manufacturer, I hope the one thing that you took is that this is about applying the science as we mentioned. And if we do that safely and effectively, we will protect those commodities and food processes. So be a science cowboy, apply the science, and protect your product. We'd love for you to like us on your streaming choice. So give us a quick moment of your time, click like. Visit us on thefumigationcompany.com. We do have a library there of our podcasts. We try to make that a very informative website. We'd love to see you cruise through that. And then again, give us your feedback. We want suggestions on future episodes of All Things Fumigation, and we want to use some of those. And then we're going to end with a disclaimer here. As always, this podcast supports fumigators in improving safety, compliance, and solutions. Always follow the federal fumigant label, state and local laws, and licensed fumigators are legally responsible for their applications. Thank you very much.